water loop.
Welcome to Waterloop, the podcast that explores solutions for sustainability and equity in water. I'm the host, Travis Loop. This episode is part of a series, Mississippi by Nature, that looks at the use of nature-based solutions to help the river and its communities. The series is supported by the Walton Family Foundation and outfitted by Patagonia. The ever-changing nature of the Mississippi River poses significant challenges for those living behind the levee at Dogtooth Bend in southern Illinois, where increased flooding and infrastructure strain can impact everyday existence. A promising solution involves nature-based strategies that restore floodplains to better manage water flow and reduce flood risk. Tharran Hobson of the Nature Conservancy shares insights into collaborative efforts with NRCS and the Army Corps of Engineers to support landowners and implement natural infrastructure such as reforestation to slow water and prevent the formation of new river channels. Well, Tharran, we're here at Horseshoe Lake in the Dogtooth Bend area, real southern Illinois. What's the challenge here with the Mississippi River?
Well, just like the folks that live down here and farm here, they just realize that the Mississippi has changed in their lifetimes, and they can see the changes, the flooding occurring more often, higher, for longer periods of time. And it really makes it a challenge for folks that live with the river, that, it affects their livelihoods, especially the farmers, and then other folks that unfortunately lose their homes in a big flood event. But when we had meetings with the locals down here, when they had come to us and asked us if we had any solutions for them with their flooding problems. And, unfortunately, a big river is going to do what it's going to do. But we came up with some solutions for them to help them get them out of harm's way. And
is that harm's way, like there are levees, but sometimes those would break or fail or get overtopped, or water gets in anyway?
Yeah. Levees fail. I mean, we can try our best to try to hem the river in, but the river's going to do what it's going to do. It's very powerful. And large floodplain river systems, need their floodplains. For flood storage, they need it for nutrient cycling, carbon storage, fish and wildlife habitat, and just the river likes to utilize its floodplain. And we did too. I mean, we would levee these floodplains off. The soil was awesome for farming because some of the best from all over the Midwest, running off into the river and then getting deposited into the floodplain. So very good farm ground. But, unfortunately, at some point, the river is going to reclaim back what is hers.
Especially in this part of the Mississippi, right? You've got you talked about how there's some pretty heavy flows that can come through. There's some areas where it pinches that river and just pushes water through real fast here. So this is a tougher spot than even others.
Yeah. Just large rivers are dynamic in nature, and we've tried to hem them in with levees and water control structures and navigation training structures on the river themselves, and it just is looking for a place to go. And this whole area right here is just kind of proves how dynamic the river is. We're about 2 miles as the eagle flies to the Mississippi main stem now. This used to be the Mississippi main stem. It meandered all through this valley in this Gulf Coast plain, and this is a meander scour that occurred during the 1811 New Madrid earthquake. It was so violent that it caused upheaval in the earth, and it changed the direction and flow of the Mississippi River for a time being, and it settled into what we call now the Thebes Gap. and it's an area where there are limestone outcroppings on both sides of the river, on the Illinois and the Mississippi. So the river has to go through that really narrow channel.
Yeah.
And during high flow, high flood events, it pushes through there like I told you earlier, like putting your finger on a garden hose. It just shoots through there. And the downstream flow is pretty fast and violent, carrying a lot of water, and it was too much for, you know, our human infrastructure with their levees and systems.
Yeah. So you talk to landowners and you're like, you know, we want to help. What do you all want to do? Here's options. So what course did that set you on in this area?
Of course, we were interested because, you know, we're interested in large floodplain restoration. It doesn't come around a lot, and when there are opportunities there, we try to take advantage. But not so much saying take advantage. This turned out to be more of a people project because there were farmers, there were folks that lived down in the bend that they just wanted out. They had seen enough. The river changed, as they told us, and well, you know, the Nature Conservancy is all about nature and people. So that's the people part of it, and we worked out a plan and listened to them, asked them what they wanted. Most of them just wanted out, and we tried to come up with a plan to help them essentially get out if they wanted. We only, you know, the NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, only does easements with willing landowners. So the landowner has to come to them and apply, and then more often it's a competitive statewide and nationwide program. So not all of them could get the easements that they wanted. So we worked with the NRCS to leverage some funds that were specifically for Dogtooth Bend, and we matched about $24 million worth of easements with a little over $500,000 of our private money, which comes from our generous donors and members. And we were able to leverage that money and start helping out the landowners. And it's still a voluntary process. Right now, they're working with the NRCS to get their conservation easements closed. Once those are closed, they get a percentage of what the land is actually worth. They could keep that land if they want it. You know, they could hunt and fish on it, whatever they want to do, except farm or build any structures. So we're waiting for some of those easements to close, and then we have contacted willing landowners that just want out of the bend. They don't want to keep their land. They want to go elsewhere and maybe farm elsewhere, but where it's drier. And so we had offered to buy the residual, which is what the appraised value minus what they got for their easement. So we offer that to them, and then they're able to become whole, and then, you know, go elsewhere.
And then that land is just left to rewild, basically, right? Are you do you do anything with it at that point?
We're going to do restoration, and one of the things that we're really interested in with the NRCS and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is natural infrastructure. So planting trees that will slow down the flows. The Corps has a huge interest in the Dogtooth Bend area because the Mississippi River is trying to cut a new channel, and it would cut off roughly 14 miles of navigation channel currently, and it really worried the Army Corps. So they're interested in the natural infrastructure to slow those flows so it won't possibly create a new channel.
And so if you put that you put that land into conservation, you reforest, that just that's restoring that floodplain, right? It's like the water can go here when there's big flows of the river, and it will lessen that pressure trying to find a new way through, right?
A new way through,
okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
So during the 2019 flood, which is a really big one, water was coming through the 1 mile failure in the levee at a rate of about, at the peak, it was 300,000 cubic feet per second.
That's incredible.
And it was 30% of the total flow of the Mississippi River at the time. So 30% of the Mississippi River was cutting across, taking a shortcut.
Where is it trying to pop out? Just connect with the Ohio a little further up than it does right now, basically?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Wow, and that would just cut off, like, yes, the navigation, but then you'd have this whole area where there's small communities and Caro and farm. They would just be on an island. That's crazy.
Basically,
wow.
Yeah. So after that 2019 flood, they had concerns with that scenario happening, the river trying to create its own new channel, and I came down here with some NRCS folks to look at some of the proposed easement properties, and closer to where it dumps in on the east side, there was this huge chasm that looked like a small Grand Canyon that was coming up from the river. It was head cutting back up towards the Mississippi. So I sent some pictures to some folks at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and they were on it immediately. Yeah, because that's their mandate from Congress, is to maintain a 9-foot navigation channel on the Mississippi River and other navigable rivers.
So the nature-based solutions, nature itself is really key in a situation like this. But what also enables that is some of these, NRCS programs and others. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of demand on them nationally, right? There's almost more interest and than there are dollars to put out there. But how effective are these programs if you can get the dollars you need? Does it work pretty well?
Yeah, these programs are permanent, so it's going to go into permanent conservation. Some other programs like CRP that farmers might take a field out, plant it in some warm season grasses, but then when the CRP contract runs out in 15 years, then they either sign back up again or they plow it up and start farming it again.
So having it kind of go into permanent conservation is really key for these federal funding programs. Very interesting.
So when the river came through, it came through with such velocity that it scoured out a lot of land. A lot of times several feet deep scours, and then just the whole fluvial dynamics, it would deposit sediment and sand in certain areas, and it would scour other areas, and then some of the sand dunes just go on for miles, and they're 8-10 feet deep, and it's just pure sand. It's like you're at the beach, but it's not a fun beach.
But you're in southern Illinois.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And, one of the things with that, too, is with the different changing habitat types, whenever the river does flood through, it creates new niches for other species. And I'm hoping that we'll probably see the interior least tern, which is a bird that's federally listed. And it's taken up to nesting out there on those, because sandbars, gravel bars along major rivers are their preferred nesting habitat, and they got it out there now. Wow. And I saw some down here about 4 weeks ago, and it looked like they were looking for a place to nest, but unfortunately at that time the whole bend was full of water, so they couldn't find any good place. And we were standing next to the Miller City Blacktop, and there were terns flitting around above us, and I was telling the folks that were with me from DU and Fish and Wildlife Service, was like, they're looking for a place to nest, and this is one of the only dry places down here right now.
Wow.
So I'm sure now, after things have dried out, they probably found their spot. And then we've also got a state listed species, Illinois forest frog, and their habitat type is sand next to shallow pools, like ephemeral wetland pools. And they have a unique life history. They live most of their year under sand. So they bury, and they only come out for a couple weeks in the spring to mate in those pools, have their tadpoles, and then they go back in
Wow.
the sand, and it's perfect. The NRCS with the restoration has already created some of those areas because, we went out there and looked, and I knew that Illinois chorus frogs were nearby. Actually, they're just south of us here. There's a colony of them south of Horseshoe Lake. It's really close to Dogtooth Bend, so he's like, if they can get their preferred habitat out there, they'll probably colonize out there as well.
Well, that's another whole benefit of some of this nature-based solutions and restoration this way is, yes, the water benefits, water management, water quality, but the wildlife too, right? That's always good to keep that in mind.
Yeah, exactly. Like I told you earlier, just having empathy for the people that there had been generations of folks here that farmed, and the river just changed, and they realized it. And I know firsthand, I was telling you the story about where I grew up on a floodplain river, and the Illinois River, and how I saw it change in my lifetime. I finally got out.
Well, that's a lot of times in these situations, others may say, why don't people just leave, right? Just leave. It's not.
Sometimes you can't,
You own property.
Yeah, you have an investment in your property, and you can't just walk away from it.
Yeah.
You need at least something to try to make yourself whole. And then there's other places where, folks are maybe not well off enough to just pack up and move someplace. I feel for the community of Cairo. They've had run-ins with the river, and it was once a huge, thriving river town that had a lot of industry, and I've heard that some of that stuff's starting to come back a little bit, which I hope it does. But then, just having to deal with the river and the threat of flooding, and then, with the realization that you can't get out because of economics.
Yeah, and then there's just the fact that this is a place where you grew up, or you have your family history, and you have an attachment that way too. So it's not always easy.
I know some of the deeds that we were looking at when we were purchasing the residuals, that some of them date back to the mid 1800s. There was a church out in the bend. There was a cemetery out in the bend, which has been covered up by probably 10 feet of sand. There's no trace of it. Most of the buildings are gone that were in the floodplain.
Yeah.
And there used to be a lot of houses and stuff out there. That's when the river was different. You didn't have the huge floods like you have now.
Yeah.
So they could actually live out there.
Yeah.
You might have to boat in once every 30 or 40 years, but now it's like you got to boat in and out once every 2 years.
You're in the water loop.